We're now 58 days away from our election in November, and in just 2 days, Harris and Trump will take the stage in what could be their first and only debate. Tuesday's face-off is a chance for the vice president to contrast her economic vision with Trump's plans, and she hopes to cut into Trump's edge on the economy in the eyes of many voters. Harris has rolled out new plans to tackle the rising cost of living and investments in small businesses. As for Trump, he botched an answer on how he would address the cost of child care in America by rambling about tariffs instead of addressing the major concerns of parents, because after all, child care is child care. Joining us now, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale University.
Big Yale day for us.
Come on, Yale.
All the Yaleys in the house, say hey.
Can we play the Donald Trump clip again and just, because you know a little something about the economy, Jeffrey. Maybe you can make sense of what we heard.
No, that's just to make me sound smart.
Well, let's hear about child care is child care from the former President Donald Trump at the Economic Club of New York.
Child care is child care. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including child care.
You know, that reminds me, when I was teaching back at your alma mater, a student on an exam on Eugene V. Debs, a great labor union leader, a traditional progressive, and he didn't know who the guy was, so he talked about this great lawsuit, Eugene versus Debs, wrote it all about some Supreme Court lawsuit. He just completely made it up. Had to give him some credit for faking it. This guy gets no credit for faking it. But given all the scary things you looked at with Melissa Murray on the threats to democracy this morning, and Quentin Folks, of course, on anticipating the dangers of the Trumpaganda coming up, and of course my colleague Jason Stanley, just before the break, I was just saying as I sat down, what value do I bring to this serious discussion? And I hope I have the good news here on the economy. What we're going to see, without doubt, coming up on Tuesday night is more Trumpaganda, but bludgeoning her, not just what you guys talked about yesterday in terms of diminishing her on race and gender, which they'll try to do. And you guys said yesterday, well, that didn't really stick. What is sticking is the Trumpaganda on the economy.
That's right.
Even Democrats, even liberal Democrats, centrist media are believing nonsense. There was something created, written about in the early 50s, even before I was born, called the sleeper effect. And what that is about is you keep repeating nonsense, even unfounded, and through the repetition, people start to believe it. And it was actually researchers at Yale, of all things, for our Yale Day. And it's a very dangerous phenomenon. And what Kamala Harris has to do, Vice President Harris has to do, is to awaken the nation to this sleeper effect. It's been a pernicious effect. And it's going to be hard to do because everywhere we look on the economy, you know, when he bellows out, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? The answer is screaming back, yes.
Well,
we were in a pandemic.
Yeah, and to that point, Reuters, Goldman Sachs report on Wednesday, quote, U.S. economic growth would likely get the biggest boost in the coming 2 years from the Democrats headed by Kamala Harris winning the White House and Congress in this November's elections, according to Goldman Sachs. Under Republican sweep or even with a divided government led by Donald Trump, economic output would take a hit next year, mostly from increased tariffs on imports and tighter immigration policies, Goldman Sachs said in a note on Tuesday. So you see the folks who actually know the numbers and see the flow of the economy starting to say, time out, let's understand what we're talking about here. This former President Trump wants to impose a broad, sweeping 10% tariff on pretty much everything and lying to the American people and saying, you won't feel that. That's just something other governments are going to pay. How does the vice president on Tuesday breaks through on the point you're making, this narrative that people believe that somehow tariffs don't affect them. That's something someone else is going to pay, and that's how we're going to pay for child care.
You're absolutely right, Michael, and I know the three of you know that tariffs are a tax on the average working family. It's I don't know, around almost $4,000 a year of tax. He does not taxing the providers, the suppliers. It's going to be passed on to the consumer. And that's a huge problem. 16 Nobel Prize winners, the vice president can mention this. We said it first, but the Nobel Prize winners blessed it and extended it, that it's going to raise inflation at least 10 to maybe even 16, 15%, just on that alone, because of the cost of importing goods, pharmaceuticals, clothing, whatever it is, semiconductors. But then on top of that, you have the reciprocal trade barriers. When they punish us, just between us, we friends here, the CEO of Harley-Davidson had to deal with this in the last Trump administration. The Trump reciprocal trade barriers you had to deal with from Europe was so hard that even though 100% of Harley-Davidsons are made in the country, to get anything into Europe, you had to shut down a plant in Kansas City and open one in Thailand to get it into Europe because of the reciprocal trade barriers. You know, we saw this in 1930 with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that were terrible.
Yeah.
So CEOs are not protectionists. That's one of many reasons why the business community is very supportive of Kamala Harris. They're not protectionists. They're not isolationists. They're not xenophobic. They're big believers in immigration and big believers in the rule of law, which is why we see so many CEOs lining up and none lining up of major CEOs behind Donald Trump. And that you go through the history of the last century, your old party, it used to have roughly half of the major business community would support the Republican candidate. It came to a dead stop in 2016.
I hear you on the sleeper effect. I also think, though, that when we talk about something like tariffs, I think part of the reason Donald Trump loves to talk about tariffs is it sounds very theoretical. To your point, people don't understand that that actually is going to come back to them as consumers. What do people know? They know that the cost of housing is way too high. They can barely afford their rent. For most people, Simone and my age, I don't think they're ever going to be able to own a house in this country. They know that the cost of child care is insurmountable. They know that their wages have not increased at a rate to keep up with the rising cost of living. They know that the grocery store, I mean, we all talked about this. You go in, you get a handful of things, and you feel as though you should have gotten a week's worth of groceries. That's what is salient to people. So my understanding is that part of what the Harris campaign has done is talked about addressing those challenges through corporate price gouging, through increasing the availability of affordable housing. But like, how do you meet people where they are on those specific economic concerns?
She's got to talk about inflation and wrap it around other things. This is the strongest economy in the world. The World Bank has just said that 80% of their growth outlook for the next year is based on the strength of the U.S. economy. And the Goldman Sachs study, those famous socialists at Goldman Sachs, endorsed this as the GDP growth economy. Yeah, exactly. And with that, we see that unemployment, we haven't seen it since this low since, Bonanza was on TV, which none of the three of you knew, but I used to watch that show.
Excuse me.
I think Michael Steele is familiar with
the
Bonanza.
Cartwright family, we're good. We're all friends.
Very good. Extra credit. But Biden-Harris administration, they actually, created 16 million jobs. Trump actually, lost about almost 2 million jobs. So it's like the unemployment numbers are great. Wage rates are increasing faster than inflation. But with inflation, it did soar. She has to admit that. But why did it soar? It soared about 9% when the Biden-Harris administration started. Well, guess what? We just had the worst recession in the post-World War II era, thanks to the former President Trump. That the way he handled crisis, the economy went off the cliff. Prices were so low, so you compare it to where it was. Oil was zero. Never in the history of humanity has oil been zero.
People are going nowhere because it was a pandemic.
Yeah, so now they're going up. So they're down to now 2.9%, and that's we're making progress on inflation.
And he put $8 trillion on the back of the next generation in additional debt, and people gloss past that. Nikki Haley tried to warn and remind everybody of that, but that's a big part of
the tax cuts that Kamala Harris has in mind. I think
for the small businesses.
It's the small businesses and for the family support are in there for people under $400,000, which is and not to help the billionaires, but less. You're exactly right, and I'm so glad you bring up the opportunity economy, Simone. That's so important because that's what she stands for. It's not just the positive spirit, but putting the numbers behind it. It was $5,000 to help start a business. What does that get you now? $50,000. Yeah, exactly.
A printer.
$50,000. That's really the real deal. That makes a big difference, and it's a very important move. And every economist is endorsing that as a terrific part of the Harris-Walz agenda.
Small businesses are truly, I think, the driver of our economy. Like, when people think small businesses, I think they think small mom and pop shops, but there are medium-sized businesses that are still qualify as small businesses, and that is restaurants, but those are also media companies, tech companies, I mean, you name it. So they're just so important. Michael, a small business owner.
Yeah, and they're hiring everyday individuals. They could be a one-person shop with an assistant, or they could be a 50, 60-person shop with a plant, floor. So
that's so important, though, too. Big business, small business. I don't know. You guys probably at the DNC. I was there too. We saw big business, small business, Democrats, Republicans, old, young, every gender and ethnicity that could fit in the room was there up on stage. Is that something that Kamala Harris does that she's not getting credit for? Is unlike anybody in either party, she doesn't engage in class warfare. She's not out vilifying business leaders, large or small, either. If there are problems, she wants to work it out, bring them around the table, work it out. That's something which is unusual in business, different. And part of it is nobody has to coach her on how to reach populations that have lacked voice before, underrepresented minorities, then she doesn't need expensive political advisors.
She's got it.